Hello, everyone. I'd like to start our gathering. My name's Robert Villa. I'm the Community Outreach Assistant here at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill, or Tumamoc Doag, Hill of the Horned Lizard. It's great to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm very excited about this book. And Elise Gornish, the director, couldn't be here tonight because she got sick. Nothing terrible. She's just feeling under the weather. So I'm going to introduce our authors and our moderator. Linda M. Gregonis is an independent researcher with a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Arizona. She's spent more than 40 years researching various aspects of Hohokam culture, including iconography, while working primarily as a ceramics analyst. She's been the editor for Kiva, is currently the editor of the University of Arizona Anthropological Papers series, and has prepared numerous indices for academic, social, and environmental science books. She enjoys public lecturing and teaching children and adults about the Hohokam. Victoria R. Evans is an archaeologist who has conducted research in the Sonoran Desert for more than 20 years. She recently retired from New Mexico Highlands University, where she served as an anthropology laboratory director, reevaluated collections, ran archaeological field schools, chaired thesis committees, and taught graduate-level classes on forensics, ceramics analysis, methodology, and Southwest archaeology. Wow. She served as the vice president for the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society from 1999 to 2000. Our moderator is Gayle Hartmann. She spent the last 35 years working in a variety of archaeological capacities throughout southern Arizona, including serving as the editor of Kiva as well, the Journal of Southwestern Anthropology and History. She is currently a research associate at the University of Arizona's Arizona State Museum. So thank you for coming, and I assume it's okay for you all to pass this mic between you all? All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming on this not too warm spring evening in Tucson. Thanks to the University of Arizona Press and Tumamoc Hill for sponsoring this series. I thought I was going to do introductions, but that's already happened, so I don't have to do that. The way this is going to go is I will ask them some questions that we've kind of talked about ahead of time. And we'll begin with just general information about the Hohokam, our assumption being that there are probably a few people here who really don't know much about who those folks were, and some people who know a lot about who those folks were. So we're going to try to appeal to both groups. There will be slides running up here. They're not necessarily connected with the topic that's being spoken about at the moment. But if you have a question at any time, please feel free to raise your hand, and the appropriate person will answer your question. So you don't need to wait till the end to answer questions. This is a yes, sir. Right. This is the book we're dealing with tonight, The Hohokam and Their World, an Exploration of Art and Iconography by Linda Gregonis and Victoria Evans. It's a wonderful book. They tell me, maybe as many as 13 years working on it. This kind of stuff doesn't come easily. But they've done a terrific job of looking at the artifactual evidence, what we have left now from folks who lived here in the past, and using that knowledge and looking at other folks in western Mexico and other native peoples around the Southwest, pursuing their ideas of how these folks would have lived, how they would have viewed the world that they live in. So that's going to be our focus for this evening. And since we're all kind of short folks, what I just suggested was that when I will sit down, but when one of them is talking, they will stand up, so at least you can all see us a little bit better. So we'll start with the setting, the Hohokam, and a few questions, and they will share these answers between them, I'm sure. Who were these folks? What does their name mean? Where did they live? When did they live? What happened to them? How are they related to the Atam, the native folks who live here today? What do the names Atam, Tohono Atam, Akimel Atam, and Yachid Atam, what do those names mean? And then, how did you decide to write this book? There you go.
That's all. So Hohokam is actually, the way that we view Hohokam is an archaeological construct. And that came very clear to me when I was meeting with the Gila River folks, because we decided to use the word Hohokam instead of Hohokam, which in the Adam language, Hohokam means people who have gone before, people ancestors. Hohokam is a corruption of that early 20th century corruption of it, late 19th century, early 20th century corruption of that, and also we take it to mean those who have gone before as well. But the people at Gila River wanted to make sure that we made the distinction between the archaeological culture and the archaeologists who were interpreting it, as opposed to what they might say about the images and things that we discussed in the book. So Hohokam culture, we defined it as fairly broadly. It's based on the material culture, so it's based on their art, the icons, the symbols that they're using and the way they use them. It's based on how they bury their dead, how they build their houses. So the Hohokam build their houses in simple grass, it wasn't grass, but stick and mud houses that are sort of an oval shape with an entryway, kind of like an igloo. They bury their dead primarily by cremation for most of the time period that we're talking about. They made pottery that was red paint on either a buff-colored background or a brown-colored background. And you don't really start defining Hohokam as a separate culture until they start making that red on buff and red on brown pottery. And that would have been around 500 AD. So before that time, we had a group of people called the early ceramic that we've defined as the early ceramic period. And those people were making ceramics, but they were all a brownware paste or had a red slip on it, as opposed to any kind of real decoration other than the shape of the pot or the kind of finish that people had on the pottery. And that redware and brownware went all the way across southern Arizona, northern New Mexico, southern New Mexico into Chihuahua, into Sonora as well. So it was very widespread. And it's only when they start doing that, actually painting the pottery, that those designs start popping out as something that's distinctive to a culture, and that's when we start defining the Hohokam culture. So the Hohokam culture, as we've defined it, as we find the symbols, go all the way from the border with Mexico, up to the Tonto Basin, west to Gila Bend and a little bit west of there. So if you drive down the road from Gila Bend to Ajo, just to the west of there is it's not really a boundary, but that's kind of where Hohokam peters out. If you go east of here, you can go all the way to Safford along the Gila and have Hohokam sites. And there's a fairly interesting site down near Tombstone, which is normally in another culture, the Mugion culture territory. Time-wise, we're talking from AD 500 up to 1450, 1500, depending on who you're talking to. And then things change. So they developed out of the early ceramic period is preceded by early agricultural period, and we're sitting right in the heart of where that early agriculture took place. If you go down to the Mission Garden, that's sitting on top of a really early site, 4,000-year-old site where they were doing irrigation agriculture at that time, pre-pottery, but the people in this area had settled at places where there was water came to the surface. A Mountain and Tumamoc Hill are those places in the Tucson, in the center of the Tucson Basin. So they were very important that way. But there's sites all along the river that have these early agricultural sites that developed when they developed pottery. They were still living in the same places. The early ceramic folks were making use of Tumamoc Hill. And how many of you have been up to the top? Okay. Oh, good. A lot of you have. Okay. So you've seen, you just came back from there. All right. It's okay. It's a good workout. But picture doing that without the road. And there's actually a pathway that goes up kind of it's like through the middle of the hill, right? Yeah, rock way. And this is a part we ought to have Gayle talk about, because she spent a lot of time studying the archaeology of the hill. But there's stuff up there that's 2,000 years old. They were growing corn on top of the hill 2,000 years ago here. At the base of the hill, they were growing agave. If you go down to St. Mary's Hospital, under St. Mary's Hospital, there was a huge Hohokam village right there. And it was one of the most important pottery manufacturing centers in the AD 9 and 1000s for the Tucson Basin. They were trading their pottery all the way across the basin from the St. Mary's site. 1450, what happened to them? I think if you look at Adam legends about what happened to the Hohokam, 1450 is when things like Casa Grande was built, the big, the great house up on the Gila River. Other big structures called platform mounds were being built at that time. They're different from those earlier simple structures that I was talking to you about the house structures and that kind of thing. More formalized, probably more hierarchical. The legends that the Adam tell about it say that those people got too big-headed, and they had an army led by Elder Brother, who was a very important being or deity in their culture, in the Adam culture, and that army led by Itoi or Elder Brother marched on the great houses and kicked the leaders out. So the leaders dispersed. They don't say anything about the people dispersing. So the people were probably still there, and they probably, at least some of them, are the descendants of those people. Adam means people. In Adam language, like ho-ho. Hohokam is a single, Hohokam is plural. So Adam is person, Adam is people. And Toana Adam means desert people. Akimel Adam means river people. Hiachada Adam means desert people, or sand people, people of the sand, yeah. So the Akimel Adam, actually, when the Spanish first got here, were along the Santa Cruz, all the way up into the Phoenix area. The Tana Adam were to the west of here. The Hiachada Adam were even farther west, out in the Ajo area, all the way over to the Gulf of California and down into the Sierra Pinacates. So very widespread group, and linguistically, I just learned from Robert Villa that they went all the way down to the Rio Yaqui with that northern Pima, which would be the O'odham people, all the way down to the Rio Yaqui at one time. So they were here, they were doing different things materially, so we don't recognize them as Hohokam after 1450, 1500. But they, for some reason, stopped doing a lot of decorated pottery. We don't know why. But we're also missing over 50% of their material culture because we don't see their cloth, we don't see their basketry, because it doesn't preserve very well. We get tiny little pieces, and they're usually burned. So we don't have a lot of data on that. What's the other one? Oh, okay. Oh, how did we decide to write the book?
She's hard to follow, Matt. So Linda and I met back in early 90s, I guess. She was teaching a class in pottery at Pima College, and I was taking the class, and after that we decided to start working together. She started hiring me to help her. And we both found that we had a lot of similar ideas of what was going on, and a sort of a fascination for the iconography and the art of this stuff, mostly pottery, that we were looking at. So when I got my master's thesis, I wrote it on what I thought the Hohokam were representing when they did geometrical shapes. I thought a lot of those may have been representing plants. And so Linda and I talked about that a great deal, and we said, well, let's write a book about it. And then that's not the only thing they did, so then we just started working on it, and 13 years went by, and with all sorts of different reasons why we didn't work on it, but that's, it took us about that long to do it, but it's been a labor of love, and we've really had a good time with it.
One of the things we thought was important when we were looking at symbolism is to look at something besides pottery to see how those symbols went across different media. So that's why we pick pottery, shell, stone carving, and rock imagery to use for that.
Okay, we'll kind of go through some of the chapters in the book and see how far we get. So their chapter 3 is titled Cosmological Roots, and my question to them is, you write that the Hohokam belief system was based on dream or trance states, animism, and ancestor veneration. How do you come to this? I guess I should say first, what does that mean? And how do you come to this conclusion? Provide a few examples from artifacts that support your contention. A lot of big words there.
Yeah, and I think they only occur in that first paragraph of the chapter. But transcendence is a word that we use so that if somebody changes their mental state, so going from, in some cases, going from a human being to an animal to a human being back again. And we do see that in some rock art where in areas where you have little figures that are going down into a crevice or a crack in the rock, and they change shape from a human to what a rock imagery, I should say, researcher is called barbell figures, kind of abstract figures, and they're either going into the crack or coming out of the crack and becoming people. And I've also seen that with bighorn sheep doing the same thing in a crack in the rock. We also see it with different types of stone bowls and things like that, or images that change as you're looking at a vessel. You can turn it around and you'll see different patterns on it. Animism has something to do more with the idea that the traditional native cultures consider everything to be alive. So everything can have a spirit, everything can have an ability to act on the world, have agency, if you want to use that word. The word that I think fits it the best is personhood. So you ascribe a personhood to a pot or a personhood to a piece of rock imagery that you're looking at, and you have to have certain things going on to define it that way, and you have to treat the artifact, treat the object in a certain way after it's done being used. For instance, you can't just throw it away. You have to do something else with it before you do away with that. And I came to that idea about personhood kind of accidentally. I was at a conference that some of us go to out in Ajo, the Trinational Sonoran Desert Symposium, and I had just heard a talk by somebody talking about stone balls, which are found all through Hohokam land. And I walked to the back of the room, and this Adam gentleman who was sitting there looked at me and he goes, objects asked to be made. And if you think about things that way, objects that way, it kind of changes your perspective on what's going on with pottery or anything else. And the last one was... Oh, ancestor veneration. The way that people bury their dead is a really good indicator of how that works in ancestor veneration. The Hohokam cremated their dead, but they often would take them out of a cremation pit and put them in a secondary jar or bowl, or put a jar or bowl over them in a separate cemetery. They would sometimes take pieces of old pottery from somewhere, something that had a heirloom piece that somebody had held, and put it in that pot. There's one example of it came from a burial out at a site called the Whiptail site, which is out at Agua Caliente Park, that had a quarter-sized piece of a human parietal buried with it. So somebody carried that around for a while before it went in there. And you find examples like that. Also offerings at the Hardy site out at Fort Lowell Park, for instance, there was a vessel that was found it was a cremation cemetery floor, but this was an offering that was separate from that, and it was a pot with a figurine next to it, so they were honoring, the people who had gone before. It's a way of marking your ancestors, and I think everybody does that to a certain extent. It's hard to know how much the Hohokam actually did that.
We also had, we have secondary cremations as well. So we have a cremation, right, and then they've removed the bones and they've burned them again, and that's also maybe a way of re-honoring the dead, for example. And what was the other thing we were going to talk about? I can't remember, but that might be it. So,
All right, moving right along. Chapter 4 is called Water, Sky, and Sea. And so they begin by writing, like other farmers worldwide, the Hohokam were inveterate sky and weather watchers. Their knowledge of the changing seasons was critical to the growth and the health of their crops. Knowing when rains would come and knowing how the rains would act meant the difference between life and death. You go on to write that there are a variety of objects, materials, and sculptures that you think are associated with water, weather, and sky. So tell us about some of them.
well, like we kind of joked that we should have named this book "It's All About Water," because we're in a desert, and what is it? What is the thing that we have to have the most around here is water. So we saw a lot of water symbolism in the objects that we were looking at and the art that we were looking at. And I mean, just for example, when Linda is really into birds, and we found a lot of water bird imagery. Now, water bird, that's important, right? Snakes and frogs and amphibians and things like that were also popping up. But we also see it in some of these geometric shapes. And when you would get lines that were zigzags or lines that were slashes, that's very possibly representing rain. And of course, then, if you want to go even farther with that, the current autumn have a rain ceremony that they do where they pick the fruit of the saguaro. And they pick it and they put it in a special basket, and then they ferment it, and they have a series of songs and ceremonies that go with drinking this saguaro, which is turned into wine. And so we both kind of feel like maybe that was also happening with the Hohokam, and that some of the imagery that we saw might not be just a particular symbol, but is actually representing a saguaro. And so we did find evidence of saguaro fruit in Hohokam sites. So we think that rain ceremony might be quite old. When Coronado's people were coming up through in the middle 1500s, they came across different groups doing this particular ceremony. So it was happening in the middle of 1500. I don't know how long that was after these great big sites were sort of abandoned. These big villages were abandoned, but 50 years maybe. So you see that water symbolism everywhere. Do you have any more? I know you do.
Yeah, water symbolism is also something that's a very pan-Western Mexico symbolism. It goes all the way down the west coast of Mexico with those water birds. There's an area called that's been labeled as Aztatlan, means place of the great white egrets, and that's in the Nayarit, Sinaloa Nayarit area. And the cultures there all have water bird symbolism as well. We think that a lot of the ideas for Hohokam symbolism came out of that West Mexico area and came up this way, along with crops, in the early agriculture period. But for something like agave that came into this area, I think we're thinking around AD 600, somewhere in there. The genetically agaves were carried in, that were brought into this area that are grown are related to blue agave that make tequila and sisal agave. So we know somebody walked all the way up from West Mexico to bring those agaves into this area. But we think a lot of the symbolism came in that way too. And there are a couple of things in West Mexico that are very important to the Hohokam, and that's the Sea of Cortez and the shell. That shell represents water to the Adam today. It represents, I'm sure it represented water to the Hohokam too. And it's also where the weather comes from. So if you're getting your summer rains that you want so badly, those are coming in from the Gulf of California. Those winter storms, that's where they're coming in from. So you know that that water comes in from the west, and that's the source of your life blood, really. So it's very important. They probably were doing the salt pilgrimage the way the Adam did it historically, and are doing it today as well. One thing that, looking at pottery, you get very pottery-centric about things. And one thing that I've noticed a lot with pottery is that they like to put a lot of schist or mica in their pottery to make the surface glittery, to make it shine, to make it, in my view, look like water. And they also put schist in pottery that doesn't need it to make the structure, and then they'll cover the entire outside with a slip. So some of these pots that are flashing by on the screen here, if you break them open, they're going to have schist in the body of that. And I think what they're doing is capturing water in the pottery as a way. And I know there's technical reasons why people say, oh yeah, well you should do it. Well, in Tucson, if there's a pottery manufacturing site besides St. Mary's, there's one down near Irvington, where Irvington and Mission cross. There's a site down there, also very important. It's nowhere near a schist source, but people were gathering schist from somewhere in the Tucson mountains and crushing it up and adding it to that pottery for a reason, to make it sparkly, to make it do something along those lines. So I think that capturing water is important. They also like to make these flat surfaces that are called pallets out of schist, again, shiny, shimmery material. And one of the things that they were doing with those pallets was burning lead ores like galena on it. Some people at the State Museum, Nancy Odegaard and her students, did some experimentation with that as to what would happen if you crush galena and then burn it. And it does, it sparkles and you can have little fireworks. So if you put that in with a cremation, it's going to make the body transpose from one area to another. But that shining and shimmering, that's a transcendence sort of thing too. You're changing shape and body. But they also thought that it might have been used as a paint. So you make it into a paint. You paint the dead body with that, and then you have this thing that's glowing and going, shining and shimmering back into the spirit world or whatever. And I was talking to Wade Sherbrooke, who's back here one day, about shining and shimmering and iridescent materials, and he suggested that it might be because they're looking for color. So if you have something like a raven feather or a lizard scales, those are iridescent, they're going to change color. So it could have multiple meanings. But I think that base meaning on the shimmering and shining has to do with water and rain.
Their next chapter is called Desert Beings. You write that the Hohokam organized their cosmos into the lower world, middle world, and upper world. How did you come to that conclusion, and what iconography supports it?
You want to start?
Yeah. So lower, middle, and upper world is, again, it's a pan-American belief system. And again, very important down in West Mexico and Mesoamerica as to dividing the world into lower, middle, and upper worlds. And in some senses, it was maybe a more simple way to organize the animals and the plants, because you could also do it by day or night. That's what they do in the Nahua area in Mexico, or by gender, male, female. But I thought we had a better shot at knowing lower, middle, and upper world than some of these others. So in some senses, it's a little bit arbitrary, but I think it works. So lower world are things that crawl on the ground, swim in water. They're things that disappear in the wintertime. They're underground. So snakes, horned lizards, you're going to have actually lizards of any kind, really. Fish, toads, frogs, things like that. Middle world are mammals, including people. Upper world is birds. because, of course, they're in the upper world. And then we also have plants that go through all three of those. And I'll let Vic talk about those.
So I'll get back to saguaros because I just totally love saguaros. You know, they have this concept in Mesoamerica called the axis mundi, which is the tree of life. And it literally is traveling through all three worlds. And if you look at the saguaro, it's very, very possible that the saguaro could have been the Hohokam tree of life. With the Atam, the saguaro is a person. Okay, so it's considered a person. So if you have this very important plant that's starting under the ground, then it goes through the middle, and then it reaches to the sky, and then it is a very important part of a rain ceremony. You can start seeing how the symbolism is going on. Now the motif that Linda and I think might represent a saguaro is what Emil Haury called a flying bird, and it's basically a line with this going through it, and he would see flying birds going over Snaketown when he was working there, and he said, that looks like this. I think it's a saguaro. Linda and I also think it could be a white-winged dove that morphs into a saguaro or morphs into a dove. White-winged doves were what pollinated the saguaros, and you can't tell me that folks back then didn't realize that, didn't see that. The other thing that I noticed when I was doing my initial research was this particular, you know, if we go over, what, a 500-mile circle, I think, if you're going from Tucson Basin over to Gila Bend, down up to Phoenix, and then over towards New Mexico, one of the things that we saw that's very consistent is this particular motif. And you just see it over and over and over again, and you often see it put in the same kind of pattern. Now, of course, I was looking at pottery, and that's basically where you see it. Yeah, I don't think you see it anywhere else, but you see it all over that whole 500-mile radius. So it clearly is an important symbol. And if it does represent a saguaro, then you could argue that it represents part of that rain ceremony, and it might also represent the axis mundi. Nope.
Does anybody have any questions at this point? Robert has one. Go.
Turtles are an important motif on pottery, and we have seen things that I would call a sea turtle on there. Now, I don't know if that means that somebody told somebody about it and painted it, or actually went down to the ocean and saw it themselves. But yeah, and I think there's been sea turtle found, probably not very much, but. Yeah. Okay. Know how that goes. Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed with the desert tortoises, when they're drawing them, they draw them with the feet facing forwards. And I have seen a number of them with the feet facing backwards, which to me says, that's flippers or a sea turtle or something like that. Something along those lines. Yeah, Wade. Yeah, the Mimbres is. Wade wants to know how that relates to the Mimbres drawings, where a lot of the marine drawings are fish, in particular marine fish, and they don't have turtles, I don't think. Marine turtles in Mimbres. The Mimbres artists were much more particular about what they were drawing in terms of accuracy on that kind of thing. In Hohokam sites, we can tell they're fish, and I think we can tell that they're big fish because there are some that look like they have two fins on them. But so I was always thinking that meant a pike minnow or something like that would have been found in the rivers, that they were that they were farming along. But I don't think we have anything that we can actually identify to species that way. There's, I think the one animal that we can feel really, or couple animals we can feel really comfortable about are bighorn sheep and, well, yeah, deer when you can get them are also bighorn sheep, and then quail, because they do the little top knots on things, and they're very cute.
Oh, there's a question, yes, in the doorway.
Okay, the question was whether you can tell the difference between a bighorn sheep and a deer in rock imagery, I'm assuming, primarily. Most of the time, you can tell if it's a bighorn sheep because they're going to have horns, whether they're the females or the males. The things that are kind of vaguely like deer, because they're a quadruped that looks like it's big enough, and they have the little, stick-up tail like deer when they're running away from you and things like that. We actually interpreted those as, I think of them as deer dogs, because you can't really tell for sure if they are a deer or something like that. The deer that for sure have antlers. So if you go up to Sears Point ones are maybe Patayan. So, if you go up to Deer Valley Rock Art Site, they have quite a few antlered deer there. And there's a site in the Tucsons that actually Gayle did the research on called the Black Sheep Cave that has an antlered deer and a pronghorn and a very amorphous little deer dog that's the biggest thing that's in there. Yeah, it looks like Mickey Mouse. Those deer dog figures in Phoenix, they made figurines of that imagery in Phoenix, and those things are they're about this big, about that high usually. They usually come in groups. They're all kind of amorphous. When they were first seen by Anglo person in the late 1800s, the person who looked at them thought they looked like guanacos from South America, so he named the site where they came from Los Guanacos. Probably not. But what we think they are liminal beings. So there's that transcendence idea again. The Cora and Huichol, who are linguistically related to the Adam and had pre-Columbian cultures that fed into ideas for the Hohokam probably, have a belief that deer came out of the sea. They're one of the creation came out of the sea, and they were one of the first animals to come out of the sea, and they weren't finished. So I think that might be what's going on with these animals, is that they're liminal. They could be a deer, they could be a dog, they might be both, but we don't really know. She wanted to know at Picture Rocks what they are at Picture Rocks, and I think most of them at Picture Rocks are sheep. I don't think I've ever seen an antlered deer there. And at Picture Rocks, there's a whole little row up at the top of things that I think are actually dogs or coyotes, as opposed to the deer dog thing, but yeah, they're canids of some kind. Yeah. Yeah.
Clarify, so what you're saying is that in the imagery, sheep were generally identified with spiral horns, and deer got
Antlers. Yeah, so clarifying the difference between the bighorn sheep and the antlered deer. So antlered deer, they look like antlers. The bighorn sheep can have things anywhere from a full spiral, to things that just kind of point backwards. And that would be a male and a female, probably. Because the females all have horns, but they don't have extensive horns. They don't curl on a female.
Okay. We'll move on to the chapter entitled Tattoos and Hairdos, Portraying Humans and Deities. So I said you write about the wide variety of human figures as clay figurines, painted on pottery, as shell pendants, or pecked into rocks. tell us how they evolved and what you think some of them represent. And you did a little bit of this already with the barbell figures, but there certainly are many others. Particularly, there's a lot of, I'll answer a little bit by myself, get you in the right direction, a lot of anthropomorphs, as they're called, that have hairdos, earrings, all kinds of stuff. So we kind of wonder what all that means.
And if we talk about the evolution of them, they start out in the actually early agricultural period, looking a little bit like bowling ball pins or penises with the nutsack down below, and they'll often have little punctate eyes, and will have a hairdo on them, and those were used. They're almost always broken when we find them, which means, when they got through with their use life, they broke them, probably purposefully to throw them away. And that evolved into something around 500 AD or so, where you have figurines that are human shape, and they have a mask-like face on them. There's no way you could identify any individual in that at all, but it's a mask-like face. Some of those are little tiny ones that often kind of get stuck in the roofing of houses, and we kind of compare them to Mesoamerican house gods, and I think Howery talked about them that way as well, as house gods. Then we have others that get a little bit more realistic, and there's more variation in the hairdos. Some of them do have what look like tattoos on them. There's a couple of different hairstyles. One is a headband that goes around, and those tend to have what we call coffee bean eyes, so they look like little coffee beans stuck on as the eyes. And then there are some that one right there is a good example, that has a headdress that's, it's not really a turban, it's a head wrap. And that one, that head wrap on that one, that particular figurine probably dates to the 1000s. And that hairstyle was still in vogue along the Gila River as late as early 1900s for young men. So it could be that we're looking at a difference, and a lot of those guys with the coffee bean eyes and the headbands are clearly female figures. So it could be that we're looking at a male-female dichotomy there. This is something that Vic and I are going to start researching, actually, to see what the distribution of these things actually are. As you move through time, instead of making a whole clay body of things, they did things like just make the face. And those can be very realistic, and they look like they're portraits of individuals. They're pretty interesting. And they look, if you hold those up to some of the Adam today, they look just like them, which is kind of fun. And then they also do things that are more abstract, that are just really simple figures. But one in particular I'll let Vic talk about, because she had to deal with it from a repatriation point of view.
Oh, are you talking about the one that was found in
The house.
Oh, okay, yeah. And we looked at a lot of figurines. So in a site that I was working on, they were, and it's down around Green Valley, I won't say where it was, but they found a pit house, but it was more like a little round house. It wasn't like any of the other houses that they had been looking at, right, and had they been excavating. And in this little house, they found 4 figurines, and they were kind of crude, but what they seemed to represent was the evolution of a female. And they start with just a face, and rather crudely made, and another one that's just kind of crude, but maybe starting to grow a little like a toddler. And then there's one where she has a little more of hips, and she has tiny breasts, and then a very, very pregnant one. All of them had these flat faces with a beak nose, and they didn't really have eyes or anything like that. And one of the things that we noticed was that the first one wasn't all that well made. The second one, it had a little, what we called a diaper on its back, like a cactus or something, like maybe it was in a little diaper of some kind. And then by the time we get to the large pregnant one, very obviously pregnant, huge breasts, huge belly, very finely made. So how do you interpret that? You find it in this little round hut. It's not like the other architecture that you're finding in this site. And one of the thoughts that we had was that maybe this was a blood hut, and that's where, you know, menstruating women would go, which sounds like a good idea to me. But, you know, so, you know, were these teaching tools? Were these some kind of symbolic dolls that were left in there as part of that particular ritual? You know, that's some of the ideas that we came up with. These I brought it back. I was in the lab at the place where I was working, and I think it was Joe Joaquin from Cells came over to take a look at what we had been finding. And so I always pulled stuff out and said, okay. And he would tell me things about what he was looking at. But when he saw those, he said, those need to be repatriated. Those are sacred. And so I said, okay. You know, but it was an interesting interpretation of what we thought we were looking at there. And I really think that we were kind of on a good track with this. Did you want to add anything?
Are births given?
Did you say birth? Or births in particular? Well, I don't know. We don't know. I mean, you do occasionally find rock imagery that looks like a woman giving birth. I think Linda knows.
But I was wondering also that must be.
Oh, that could have been a birthing hut? It could have.
I don't know if there are. Yeah. This is one of those things that you don't get that end of the thing. We know about deaths of children and what happened with them. A lot of times the infants and young children are not cremated, unlike adults in that same setting, and they are sometimes buried with miniature vessels that are not kid-made. They're made by adults, but they're buried with these miniature vessels. And there was one site that's up near, it's actually up near Los Morteros, up at the north end of the Tucsons, that I worked on, that had a woman who was buried in, it was in her pottery that was with her dated to the 12 and 1300s. She was in a house that dated to the 1000s. Around that house were several infant burials, and she was laid out in that house as if she was supposed to take care of the kids that were, I mean, that's what struck me, is that, you know, she's there to take care of those kids that are on the outside. And all those kids had miniature vessels buried with them.
Why don't you say a bit about the ball game sculptures, people, whatever we want to call them?
I don't think they're playing ball games. I've never seen anything that convinces me that there's a ball. Well, what she's talking about, there's a couple of caches that have been found where people have, and they're very detailed caches too. They, you know, the people are very detailed, but a lot of them are standing or sitting. They're not like action figures, right? But they sometimes have what has been interpreted as shields on their arms. And I don't know if they have them on their knees. I don't think I've seen them on their knees. But they'll sometimes have flute-like instruments with them, that kind of thing. And I don't think we have, I have a whole different take on ball courts from most people. I don't think they were ball courts. I think they were dancing plazas, which is how the Akimel Adam interpret them. But yeah, it'd be fun to find them in a setting like there's this great little sculpture. I think it's from Nayarit. It's a 3-dimensional sculpture that has ball players in a ball court doing their thing in clay.
So just one of the things that I found when I was doing a lot of excavation down here in the Sonoran Desert were little tiny skinny arms and legs, and they were just by themselves, maybe about that long, very, very thin. And one of the things that you find a lot of figurines that don't have arms, and Linda and I think that they may have been putting those arms on and positioning them and the legs as well. So I know that's a little bit away from your ball courts, but I just suddenly thought of it and thought I wanted to throw that in there.
Okay, she was asking about their schist paddles, paddle-shaped objects that were found at Tres Alamos site in the San Pedro Valley. I don't think they found anything like that anywhere else, as far as I know. And I don't know if anybody's really looked at those to see if there were, impact marks on them or anything like that, to see if they were hitting something with them or grinding something with them or whatever. They were excavated in, I think it was the 1940s, 30s or 40s, and I don't think they've really been examined closely, unless somebody back there knows if they have or not. Sure. Yeah. I don't think we had a lot of what she wants to know is if we had any rock imagery that was like half petroglyph and half pictograph, and I don't think we do. I think we have very few pictographs, like the Black Sheep Cave is an exception, and mostly petroglyphs. Often reworked petroglyphs. I mean, they spend a lot of time, repecking things that they really like too.
As you get further west in Arizona, you get more painting and fewer petroglyphs, but not here. So the last chapter is entitled Symbology, Context, and Culture. And this is about, what happened to these folks. So they write, in the AD 1400s, the archaeological signatures of the Hohokam and others dissipated, kind of disappeared. You also note the Native American populations that remain in southern Arizona continue to farm and gather wild resources in the Sonoran Desert, and that their ideological focus is similar to that of the Hohokam. And they've already spoken about this some. But try to give us some more examples, if you have, about the similarities between Hohokam and O'odham.
Well, some of the symbols are in. Well, she was talking about the saguaro wine ceremony in particular, but there's also things like the O'odham do something called a skipping dance that they use egrets in the dance. So the egrets remain, those water birds remained very important. Doves were very important to the O'odham as well. If I remember this right, they from Amadeo Ray's work, they actually on the O'odham people would sometimes capture doves, like right now, when all the white wings are coming in. They might capture them and keep them through the saguaro fruit season and then let them go at the end of that, maybe to attract more fruit or something like that. We find saguaro fruit in lots and lots of different sites as well. If you're looking at symbology that's either carried through or it's there because you're in the desert and they're out there, horned lizards is one where in traditional O'odham medicine they use Hohokam horned lizard effigies. They're made out of wood, but they're very similar, in shape and size to some of the stone ones that you find in Hohokam sites as well. And you find horned lizards in nearly every Hohokam site. Other examples. One of the things I don't know when people started doing this in O'odham pottery, but they do something called a whirlwind pattern that it resembles what we've been showing up here a lot, are interlocking spirals. That was a real favorite design element for the Hohokam all through the Hohokam period. And the O'odham picked up on that, but they do something called a whirlwind pattern, and there it comes together in sort of the same way, but the ends join instead of being separated. So it's a little variation on that theme, but I don't know when that started or where. It might be something that didn't come in until the 1700s even. They're living in the same places they were living that the Hohokam were living in pre-Columbian times. They're using, historically they were using, in the Phoenix area, using the canal systems in the same region as well, and they were doing irrigation agriculture along the Santa Cruz too. You couldn't do the big canals on the Santa Cruz like you could in the Phoenix area. The physiography just doesn't allow for it. You can do small ditches and canals on the floodplain surface here, but you can't dig those huge canals that you see along the Gila and along the Salt. So what we did when we were doing our book is we looked at Adam's stories, if they would fit, to see maybe this thing fits what's going on. And that's the long history of doing that in archaeological and anthropological contexts. One of the first people to work on Hohokam sites was a guy named Jesse Walter Fuchs, and he worked at Casa Grande National Monument. And he worked on a couple of room blocks that he was interested in discovering Hopi history. So he associated all those with Hopi, because there are stories in Hopi that say our people, some of our clans came from the Hohokam region. Frank Hamilton Cushing, who is the one who named Los Guanacos site, also worked at Casa Grande. He was affiliated with Zuni, so guess where his people went after they left the Hohokam? So you had that kind of contestation going on as well, and I'm sure things got interpreted within those contexts by the Anglos, and who knows what the O'odham were really thinking about that. They were pretty circumspect about things, but some of the legends that they tell, some of the stories that they tell, seem to have things that show up in the iconography. And there's one, if you're all familiar with Kokopelli, and in the O'odham and Hohokam art, there's often a flute player type person who's bent over like a C, and he's often associated with another figure that's standing in back of him, holding on to him. And there's a story that an informant named Thin Leather told Jesse Walter Fuchs that talks about a leader of Casa Grande, who was not a nice person, got mad at wind over, I think it was a bet over a female. And he lost, the leader lost the bet. So he got mad at wind, or got mad at rain, I'm sorry, it wasn't wind, and blinded him. So after that, wind had to lead rain wherever he went. And if you think about how our monsoons kick in, it's wind before rain almost every time. So I think, they're looking at the natural history as well as maybe some of those legends. So we did pull some of those ideas out, and whether they're valid or not, I don't know whether we'll ever be able to know that for sure.
Questions, anybody? Ma'am?
Did you ever see any imagery of coyotes?
Not javelina, because as far as we know, they weren't here up until the Spanish got here. We think that they may have followed cattle herds up here. But coyotes, yeah, there's an image that's been going by that shows some little coyote-looking figures in there. And if you look at, the top of that has a little figure called a Tzipactli on there. And that's a Mesoamerican, it's a jaguar, snake, crocodile image that's combined. And it's an earth monster. And some archaeologists think that that's what the little coyote figures that we see in Hohokam art, especially in shell, represent. But we think they represent foxes or coyotes. I mean, they have the same behavior as those animals. So yeah, we do see them, and we see them. If we're looking at a canid, is it a dog or is it a coyote? We find coyotes in burials once in a while, so not very often, but it's mostly dogs. But there it is. There's a slide right there. And the two on the left are pottery. The three on the upper corner are shell, and the little guy on the top is the Tzipactli. And that's the deer dog. Yeah. You can see, what is that? It doesn't really look like a guanaco, but, did the Hohokam raise dogs for their hair? Maybe. We did. They had dogs for sure, but we don't know for sure what they were doing with them. Maybe ate them. Don't know for sure.
Well, a bewitching hour of 7 has come and gone. So thank you all for coming, and the ladies will be up here to answer questions. When you go outside, buy a copy of this wonderful book. Thank you.